All right, so in today's video, we're going to talk about a topic that's kind of near and dear to my heart, which is auto versioning. In my day-to-day life as a DevOps engineer, something I tend to come across quite a bit are people that are doing versioning kind of the old school, right, old school way, right? Like if it's a Python project, you might have a init file somewhere that has a version, var in it, or you might have a version file somewhere, and then you might have a docs, directory where you're doing, automated Sphinx docs or something like that, which has to have a version tied to it. And so these are all pieces that maybe a change log even, but these are all pieces that you're having to manually update, right, when you're trying to cut a release or go to a new version or what have you, right? And so utilizing tools like conventional commits, semantic versioning, and a product called Commitizen, which is a package, we're going to be able to actually have automated change logs, automated versioning, and more of things to that nature, right? And so the cool thing about this is it works with anything, right? Python, any type of project. In this case, I'm going to be using Rasa Chatbot, which is theoretically Python behind the scenes, but the actual artifact file that we're going to be working with is just a tar.gz file that the model is zipped into. So I'm going to show you how to auto version that and how that's all going to work. So that being said, conventional commits is kind of a new little tool that's pretty cool, but it's a concept of basically creating commits in such a way, whether they're a fix, a feat, or a breaking change. And these kind of relate back to either patch or minor versions in semantic versioning. So semantic versioning is a concept of having a major, minor, patch version type number. So in this case, major, minor, patch, right? So utilizing conventional commits with semantic versioning, you're now able to use a tool like Commitizen basically to automate your change logs and what your versions should be, and using those versions to, name your assets accordingly or whatever, right? So that being said, we are going to use Rasa today. They're an open source chatbot company. They're going to be kind of the platform that I build off of. Um, the main repo here, I have the initial repo, the initial branch, which has kind of the starter files, and then there's the main branch that has like this all completed that we're going to eventually show. So for now, you can clone this down. I'm just going to showcase it locally here. So I'm just going to create a new repo with and demo it locally. So in this case, we'll just make a directory and call it, Rasa chatbot, right? CD into the Rasa chatbot. And you can tell there's not much in here in the requirements file. It's really just these two things. It's just Rasa and Commitizen. Right, so I'm going to open this. Just as a heads up to as housekeeping, I'm running this on a Ubuntu WSL setup with Python 3 and everything already kind of set up on it. If you're working off of a Mac, there are some documentation out there with Rasa specifically on how to get it working on a Silicon Mac if you're running on that. Otherwise, most of these steps should be pretty much straightforward if you're running on any kind of Linux platform. So that being said, we're going to create a new file here and call it requirements.txt, right? I'm going to drop those two things in there. And then now, just like I have in the README, right, we're going to set up our virtual environment. So I'm going to do Python 3 to create a new virtual environment. And then I'm going to source that. So I'm now activated and now in that virtual environment, you can tell here. And now basically we're just going to do a pip install on the requirements file. So this is going to install Commitizen, which we're going to need to generate our CZ toml file, and it's also going to go ahead and install Rasa, which we're going to use to demo the process here. So this will take just a few minutes to install. The longest part typically is TensorFlow, just because that's the main platform that a lot of the chatbot models and AI type things are built off of. So when this is done, we're going to generate our CZ toml file and our initial changelog and get our initial tag set up. And we'll kind of showcase how this will work locally off of that. And then I'll demo, making a change to the actual main branch of the main bot with a PR and showcase how the bot will change and how we can deploy it. So this should be just about done. So if we look now, this main init branch is done. So I'm just going to pull up the main branch and show what we have here in this TOML file. So you can see as of the time of this video, my current version of this bot is 0.3.0, right? But we're going to work off of this new one over here. So the first thing we have to do, because we've already installed Commitizen, is we actually have to initialize it and get the first file set up. So that's how we generate this file to begin with. So now we're going to run cz init, and we're going to tell it, in this case, a cz.toml. If you're running off of, Poetry or Python, you could do PyProject or so forth, but we're going to do the toml file. You're going to leave the default as conventional commits. You can leave this to the default as well. I am not going to install the pre-commit hook, but if you do, it'll do local checks on commits to make sure they're valid conventional commits. And now if you look, right, it says you can bump the version to create the changelog by running cz bump changelog, right? And if we look here, we have our initial stuff. The only things I like to add are these lines to it. And this is just basically telling it on the version bumps, this is the file I want you to update. These could be multiple files if you've got a version, in it that you want updated. And then this is just telling it, hey, when you do the update, I want you to also update the changelog, right? So if I now look at what this said, I should be able to now do a cz bump changelog, right? This is not an actual Git, Git repo, right? So it doesn't know how to do it. So what I'm going to do as a test, we're just going to create a new repo here. We're just going to call it Rasa Chatbot video. And we're going to do this. Right, so now if I do a git or a cz bump, right? So now it's basically saying, hey, we don't know about the 001. It couldn't be found. If this is the first one, and I'm like, yeah, it is, right? So I want it to kind of create it, right? So in this case, it would normally do the push and so forth, right? So in order to kind of get this going, we're going to just do a basic README real quick. And then I'm going to do a czc command, which will do the commit. And I'm just going to tell it it's a doc change, README, and initial README. All right. So now if I do the cz bump changelog, right? So now it created the tag for me and it created the bump message. So if I look right now, there's no, the other files are still there, but now I have a commit message, right? So if I do a git push origin head now, right, it's all up to date, right? So if I refresh this, you can see it's just got kind of the basic thing, and it's got that first initial README, right? So now basically everything is kind of set up locally that we would need for the toml and everything. So now I've got the initial part though is we need to generate the actual changelog, right? And so we can do and we're going to add the toml, and we're going to add the requirements file, right? And I'm going to say this is a feat. We're just going to call it initial, adding in initial files, right? Now if I do a cz bump, right? Now you can see that it bumped the version from 001 to 010, and if I look now, it generated the changelog, right, with the 010 and everything. So that's kind of like the basic, right? Now I have, you could see a tag of 010, and so I could do a git push, right? And now if I look over here, you'll see I have that 010 tag, right? And then if I were to add the rest of the files in here, right? So now when I push, that's pushing the commit message that it made here, basically when I did the bump. And so now if you look, there's my change log. And now if I look at the commit message, right, here's the bump message, right, that it created with that CZ command. And you could see that's when it updated the TOML file for me, right? It went from 001 to 010, and it updated the change log appropriately, right? So the other part of this now is I could basically do a Rasa init, right? That's going to, and I'm just going to take all of the defaults here, yes, and that's going to generate some files behind the scenes, and it's going to train a model and so forth, right? So now you can kind of see I have the basic kind of setup here, right, that we have in the main branch of the original repo. And so utilizing that repo, right, we're able now to uh, do a checkout, create a PR, make some changes, push it back. And because of the GitHub Action stuff, which I'll show you in a second for the workflows, it will auto generate the model for us, rename it appropriately, tag it as a new release version, and then we can utilize that with the existing Rasa Helm chart, right? So you'll see here, hey, do you want to talk to the virtual assistant? Yes. And it loads up that default model that it created. And here in just a second, I'll be able to talk to the bot, right? So if I say, wait for it to come up. So now if I say hello, are you a bot, right? It's like, yes, I'm a bot powered by Rasa, right? So the basics works. So now from here though, you want like the automation part of it, right? You want the auto versioning to happen. You want the model when it trains it to be, versioned correctly and so forth. And so that's where if we look back at the original repo um, that will be in the description, you'll see that we have a set of GitHub workflows here now. And one of these is the build train PR step. And so this basically on pull requests that are either open or modified, I have it go through and do the training. But before that, I actually have it check out the branch or the PR. And here I'm setting the get commit message to a variable. And then I'm installing Commitizen, and then you can run a CZ check command with the -m and give it a file, and it will validate, or in this case, a text message, right? So a string of text, and it'll validate that it's a valid conventional commit message, right? Because we want to make sure that the conventional commit messages and everything match up correctly, because that's how we're doing our auto versioning. So if all that checks out, then we're just doing a Rasa train here with the specified version. That does a train and a test and everything all kind of built in. And this GitHub token is just a personal token that has permissions to write back to PRs so it can make a comment. And then here I'm just checking that the CZ Commitizen works, the versioning, and then setting that and then echoing it. So the cool thing also about Commitizen is you can do a CZ version -p, and it will give you whatever the version is at the time from the TOML file, right? So utilizing that, I could set a version and then echo what that current version is at the time. Then the next workflow is that will then generate, in most cases, a bump message, right? Because when that merge goes in, if it's a feature, whatever, right, it's going to check and see if it needs to do a version bump or not, right? So when those PRs come into the main branch, then this basically is saying, hey, anytime when there is not a bump message, then run this. It's going to check out the this bump version thing from Commitizen and basically see if it needs to do a bump version or not. If so, then it's using this GitHub token that I've got set up basically to push back to the repo the changes, right? And then the final piece is when there's pushes to, branch master, and if it is a version bump, right? So there has been a version bump, then I'm going to take that and do a Rasa train on it to get the model file. I'm going to set the version appropriate here using the CZ version command, and then I'm going to change the model name to match the version, right? And then I'm going to upload it as an actual release. So if we look here, I'm going to now change sections and we're going to go back to the auto version. Right. So you'll see right now our TOML file is 030 and our domain file, right? You can see I'm a powered, bot powered by Rasa. So let's say, for example, we wanted to add something different to the text, other than, hey, how are you? We could say, hey, how are you doing, for example, right? Hold the response. So now I'm going to do a git checkout, create a new feature. Right. And if I look here, we have that one domain file, so we're going to add that domain file, and then now I'm going to use the CZ commit command, CZC or CZ commit, and I'm going to say, hey, this is either a fix or a feat, right? And so if we look back here, the fixes relate to patch versions and the feats relate to minor versions, right? So if we're looking at semantic versioning, major, minor, patch, right? So in this case, if I do a fix, it's only going to update the patch, right? So if I do this as a fix, it should go from, according to this, it should go from 030 to a patch, so it would be 031, right, for this specific one. So in this case, we're going to try that. We're going to do it as a fix, right? The scope of this file, I'm just going to tell it it's the domain.yaml file. And just like what we did, we updated the greeting response, right? And now if I push this, right, and if I come back here, we create a PR. We're going to create it, from our feature branch into that main. This is going to start triggering the actions, right? So if I go over here, this is now going to do the train actions, right? So right now it's doing this GitHub actions, the build train PR. So it's going through, checking out the code, getting the latest commit message, making sure that it's a valid commit message. If it is, then it's going to train the bot and then just echo out the version at the end here. So it'll take just a minute for this to run. While this is running, we could talk about real quick the Rasa Helm chart. So Rasa has Helm charts, right? And that allows you to basically install the Rasa platform on a Kubernetes environment, right? And so in this case, we are using the Rasa open source, and so there's a values YAML file here that they have that has a bunch of values in it that we can use, right? And one of them actually is initial model. So you can, under application settings, you can give it an initial model and tell it where you want to pull that model from. And so here in a few minutes, when this is all done, we're going to have a new model version sitting in GitHub that we can then point it to, right? And then we can apply it. So that being said, I've already kind of set up on my local setup here. So if we go here, So what I've done is I've already kind of set up a value file that has our application settings, our initial model. So you can see right now it's pulling from model 030, which before we made this was the latest model, right? And then I'm giving it the image tag that I wanted to use, and then I'm using Socket.io so that we can talk to it through the chat widget. So now basically, while that build is going, you can see currently it's still doing the training and everything. We could test this current version locally, right? So if I do a a Helm install, and now here in a minute, once this comes up, once they're both running there, we'll be able to port forward and hit the box. And so what I've done here is I've got a chat widget that's just set up to hit the local host at port 5005, which is where this is basically proxying out to. And so if we open this up, you can see right now if I say hello, right, I don't get anything, right, because it's not running, right? But if the pods are up now, so if I run this command to port forward, and then now if I come back to the bot, see now it's responding, hey, how are you? And if I could say, you know, are you a bot, right? It gives me that answer. And then if I say hello again, right, it's just saying the hey, how are you? So it doesn't have our new response that we're trying to give it, right, where we're saying how are you doing, right? That part. So now our job finished, right? You could see that it set the version appropriately. It echoed it out. Hey, it's 030 because we haven't merged it in, right? So everything looks good here. So we can now merge this PR in, delete the branch. And so now when I come back, you'll see there's this action here, right? Bump version and create change log. So now it's trying this section because we are we're going to have a commit, right, that doesn't have a bump in the message yet because it hasn't bumped it, right? This is the step that's actually going to generate and bump the version. So you can see, just like I mentioned, right? It runs through and it says it runs a CZ bump and it's like, oh, there's a change, right? We need to go from 030 to 031, and it's a patch change, just like I mentioned, because I told it it was a fix. And so then it bumps the version and then pushes back to the repo. And so if we look now at the commits, you'll see, right, we have a version bump. It came back 030 to 031, and you can see there's a job that's tied to it, right? So that's what this like little thing is here. So if we look at that job, this is the job here that's generating the model because now we do have a commit message that starts with bump. So it's going to do the Rasa train action, which is what it's doing right now. It'll install Commitizen, set the version, and then change the model version to match appropriately. So here in a few minutes, we're going to have a model file that we can update here to now point, and instead of 030, we're going to tell it, all right, now I want you to go to 031 and 031, right? And so as soon as this is done, I can update my Helm chart, which will redeploy my pod on with this new model file. And then when I talk to the bot, I should get the updated response, right? And so now you can kind of see how the automated CI/CD part is working, right? Because not only is it automating the version in the TOML, which I'm then using in my CI/CD, but it's also automating my change log for me appropriately. And if I had other files that I needed to modify this version in and keep it updated, it could also do that for me, right? So here in just a second, this will be done. So you can see how it trains it with like a random name right now. If you're using, Jenkins or something like that, there's an actual output from the Rasa docs called, I think it's dash dash model name or model out. So you could utilize something like that if you wanted to actually just have the model name appropriately when it does the train. But I find it's just as easy to just do a quick move and rename it since it's just the one file. So that's what it does. You can see the current version right at this time is now 031. So it moves the model appropriately to that name. Right here it uploads it. And so now if we go back to the repo, now you can see we have a 031 right with that model file. So now we can come back over to here and we can do a Helm upgrade and give it that file. And so now that we've updated, right, we updated that file appropriately. So now it's looking for 031 and 031, right, for the file and where it's at. So now a kubectl get pods. We should see it's spinning up the new ones now. When these come up, then it'll kill the old ones. I gotta copy this again. So you can see now it killed off the old one. So now if we run this, if I refresh this page to talk to the bot, see now it says, hey, how are you doing, right? So now we've got the new version of the bot, right? So that's kind of how the auto versioning stuff, and kind of everything kind of pieces together. Hopefully this helps. Like I said, it works across whether you're in Python or Node or Go, or if it's just in this case a file that you're modifying. The sky is kind of the limit on how you do things. If you have like a develop branch and a main branch, you could basically do what I'm doing here on the develop branch, cut the release version and everything there, and then just move that version to your prod location when you do a merge from develop into main, for example. But hopefully this helped. Stay tuned for the next video where we start talking about Jenkins as code and Kubernetes and building out your own EKS platform with Terraform in AWS and how all of that stuff is going to work, and then being able to do some of this stuff in Jenkins instead of GitHub Actions. So stay tuned for that. Hopefully this helped, and see you next time. Thanks.